Budget Committee of 2024 budget season on October the 4th, 2023. I'll now call on the Regional Clerk, Will Short, to perform the roll call. Will.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Chair Redman.
Present.
Councillor Craig. Councillor Deutschman.
Just in time.
Councillor Erb. Present. Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Chair Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hunink.
Present.
Councillor James.
Present.
Councillor Liggett. Councillor McCabe. Councillor Nowak. Councillor Solonen.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Here.
Councillor Williams. And Councillor Wolf.
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gathered today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we will move to item 4.1. Council colleagues, as we plan for 2024, the challenges we are facing are as significant and in some ways even greater than those we faced last year. That said, this is the second budget of this term of council, and I think we've learned and know we've learned an awful lot through the process last year. Of course, I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone as we work to make important and difficult decisions that balance affordability and service delivery. I know we will get into the details today, but there are no surprises coming with inflationary increases, increasing service demands, and quite frankly, not enough funding from other levels of government. We have, in fact, difficult choices ahead. We also know this is not a challenge that is unique to our community, which is why we are pleased to have a presentation from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities here today to talk about the pressures on rapidly growing municipalities and the need for a new municipal growth framework. With that, I'll turn over to Matt, Director of Policy and Research for SCM. Matt is attending virtually, so good afternoon, Matt, and welcome to Waterloo Regional Council. He's not? Matt is not online right now, but we are working to get him on. But when he is here, he will be joining us virtually. Councillor Foxton, while we wait.
Thank you. While we're waiting, my CAO and I were sitting in, and my CAO sent me a report with the interest rates going up and the people renewing their 5-year mortgage. Their mortgage is going to go up $125 a month per $100,000. So I want us to keep that in mind, that there's a huge financial burden coming on the public with these renewals of 5-year mortgages this year.
Mm-hmm. Matt is in the waiting room to some degree. I don't have jokes, actually. I like listening to jokes, but I don't have any of my own. I'm pretty boring.
Thought as a Tory, you'd have a couple.
Hey, Matt, good afternoon and welcome to the Regional Waterloo budget meeting. I did an introduction that you missed, but we're glad you could join us today, so I'll just turn it over to you. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Terrific. Good. Well, sorry to join late. There was an issue with the link, but we got it sorted, and it's a real pleasure to join all of you. Thanks very much for taking an interest in FCM's advocacy on this topic and inviting us to come and present. Appreciate the introduction. I didn't hear, but I'm going to assume that you let everybody know that I head up the policy and research team here at FCM. And my team is leading this work around what we've been calling a municipal growth framework. So I'm gonna share my screen here, and I'm gonna walk through a slide deck. Just give me one sec here. That's not working. You guys see that now?
Yep, good to go, Matt.
Now, am I controlling that, or did somebody else share their screen?
Yeah, we will control the deck. Matt, if you want to just say next slide.
Sure. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, well, next slide. So what I want to do is cover the policy and political context for why we're doing this work. A lot of which I know will not be new to you, but I want to cover it to make sure you know how we're talking about this with our federal counterparts and how we're engaging with our members on it. And then I want to walk you through sort of the start of our analysis that we're doing internally. Next slide. So this work started out of a resolution, as you're probably mostly aware, that our membership passed at our annual conference in Toronto at the end of May, calling for FCM to undertake advocacy around a municipal growth framework. And I think, for those of you who have been elected for some time or have been, engaged in these issues or in proximity to FCM, to some extent, this isn't new, right? Like FCM, for 100 years in some form or another has called for, increased forms of revenue and increased autonomy and new ways of working with the other orders of government. But what really is new here and why we think there is a political opening here for us to advance advocacy in this way is that the population of the country is growing so rapidly, and some of the cracks in how municipalities have been funded are really at a breaking point and are really being exacerbated by the pace of that growth. And FCM has been clear in our advocacy that we welcome that growth. Municipalities welcome that growth. The population growth is essential to prosperity for the country. But what we're saying here is that we don't really have the right funding model for cities to be able to accommodate that population growth and ensure shared prosperity for all Canadians in that growth. And that's really the context here. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these next few slides because it's really the basics that we're trying to get across to the provinces and the federal government and some of the stakeholders in the business and labor community that we're trying to bring on board as part of a coalition for us in this work. Really, we're trying to lay out the way in which cities are funded now and how municipalities are pushing up against those limits. So you can go to the next slide. This may, this is showing the municipal share of all taxes collected in the country. And it may not look like a big change, but if you go from 1990 to today, nobody thinks that municipalities are being asked to provide less service or play a smaller role in the country. The role that municipalities are playing, as you all know very well, has only increased, and yet the total share of revenue that's collected by municipalities has decreased from 12% to below 10%. And that might not seem like a big change, but when you compare it to the increase in expectations, it is quite significant. Next slide. This is showing where municipal revenue is increasing. And there's been a slow and steady increase in property taxes. In recent decades, there's been an emergence of increased share of development fees. There's across the country been growth in other forms of own source revenue. Largely that's around resource revenue in certain provinces. And that category really varies quite a bit from province to province. Next slide. This is, I think, an important part of our argument here. There's two reasons really why we're talking about a municipal growth framework. The first is the population growth that I mentioned. The second is the increasing disconnect between municipal revenue and economic growth. And so, the green, gray, and yellow lines there are inflation-adjusted growth in provincial and federal revenue since 2016. From sales tax, from income tax, from payroll tax. And it's, double-digit growth and above. Inflation-adjusted property tax growth has been negative. When you factor in inflation, municipalities are collecting less revenue in property taxes. And so there's this real disconnect, we feel, between the capacity for municipalities to raise revenue and what they're being asked to do by Canadians and by other orders of government. And this is the other reason why we're talking about a growth framework. We want to see a new mix of revenue sources that are better linked with population growth and economic growth. Next slide. Again, another slide that I don't really need to convince you of, but is part of the conversation here, which is around the limitations of property tax. Property tax plays an important role. We're certainly not saying that there shouldn't be a property tax, but we're saying the property tax is being asked to do too much. That it's on the more regressive side of the different options we have in terms of taxation, and then it doesn't grow with the economy. There's also shifts in commercial property tax base that, if you project out longer term, are going to result in a decreased share of taxation for municipalities. And it contributes to the overall cost of housing, like development charges. Next slide. So another part of the argument that we're making here to the other orders of government is that the outdated financial framework that municipalities are operating in is really impeding our ability to tackle some of the biggest and most pressing and most complex public policy challenges that the country is facing, and that's namely housing affordability, homelessness, and climate. And so I just want to walk through those briefly to give you a better sense of how we're starting to talk about this issue. So I'll start with housing affordability. So if you go to the next slide, please. So we've all seen, you've all seen this goal that CMHC put out in a report a little over a year ago, identifying that we need to be building in Canada about 5.8 million homes between now and 2030, which is roughly doubling housing construction. I know you've heard that from your provincial government. You've been hearing this loud and clear. And the part of the political narrative here is that this is going to take like a wartime effort to build housing. But the discussion has really been around the units themselves. Even there, that's a big challenge. We know the labor shortage, the construction costs, and interest rates. There's big challenges that are outside of municipalities' control to achieve this goal. But we don't think, FCM doesn't think we've had properly the conversation we need to have around what it actually takes to build the communities that those people are living in. And so we've been undertaking research that we intend to make public later this year. And so I appreciate you keeping this within the municipality for now. That looking at the cost per unit of all of the municipal infrastructure.
Mr. Chair, point of order. I'm just cognizant that he said he's undertaking research to keep within but this is a public meeting, so I'm just want to make sure they're aware of that.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. I appreciate that being raised. Why don't we skip ahead to the next slide? I can continue the conversation. I appreciate that point. But I will speak to it, which is to say, that we need a conversation around the total cost of the level of infrastructure that we need to invest to achieve that housing supply goal. And so we'll be coming out with those numbers publicly later this fall, and the costs are very significant. The key piece for this meeting is that municipalities, as you know, really have two options. There is, the cost of municipal infrastructure related to those new housing units can be borne through development charges or through property taxes. And so what we're saying is that we need a new funding model for housing development in this country. And in order to reduce the pressure on property taxes and development charges, which, as we know, contribute in a negative way to housing affordability overall. It's not to say they don't have a role to play. We feel that they do. But if we're going to double housing construction, we need a new funding model. And so that's a big part of how we're framing our work around a municipal growth framework. There's also, though, and that's what this current slide speaks to, all of the existing infrastructure that's in the ground, and the replacement cost of, according to Statistics Canada, of all of the municipal owned assets that are in very poor conditions in terms of their condition rating, is in the range of $170 billion. And this is in terms of an infrastructure deficit, a number that's trending in the right direction through collective investment. Municipalities have stabilized this trend, but there's still a lot of work to do here. And part of what we're looking for in a municipal growth framework is a set of revenue tools that municipalities have to be able to invest in state of a good repair and asset management. And so that's an important part of a municipal growth framework as well. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the other, primary public policy challenges that are, front of mind for all of you and for Canadians, homelessness really tops the list, and we're seeing a really alarming increase in the rate of homelessness. I know you're seeing it in your region and across Ontario, but looking in other jurisdictions, Quebec, the Health Research Institute in Quebec just released a paper showing a 34% increase in homelessness across the province. And I think we appreciate that the property tax was never designed to address the interrelated challenges around mental health and substance use and policing related to homelessness. And on the flip side, we know that all orders of government together are spending an extraordinary amount of money to manage this as a crisis. And so part of a municipal growth framework would be to look at how we can collectively invest upstream in prevention of homelessness and providing supportive housing with wraparound health and social supports for those that are experiencing chronic homelessness. Next slide. Related are public safety costs. I mean, this is the number one operating costs typically for municipalities. It ranges from about 10% to a third of municipal budgets. But these costs are on the rise, related to a number of factors, but a growing demand for services, in part because of the interrelated issues that I mentioned around mental health and substance use and homelessness. And the projection is that the cost pressure is expected to increase. And at the end of the day, I think there's a recognition that we aren't getting the outcomes in terms of public safety and in terms of health and well-being of residents that we all want from the current approach. So that's another element. Next slide, please. The third is around climate change. So really the big three drivers here and the big three outcomes that we're looking to address here through a municipal growth framework are housing affordability, homelessness, and climate. On the adaptation side, the $170 billion infrastructure deficit doesn't factor in the impact of climate change. That's based on historic costs. And we all know what a change in climate means for the country and for municipalities, both in terms of chronic impacts and the impact on infrastructure, but also the investments municipalities need to be making to protect Canadians. And so we're seeing, we've done research with the Insurance Bureau of Canada that identified a level of investment in the range of over $5 billion a year in just in municipal infrastructure to be able to protect Canadians from the worst of climate change. And this is another element of municipal finance that we want to try to address in a municipal growth framework. Next slide, please. When it comes to reducing emissions, there's a significant role that municipalities can play. As you know, when you take transportation, buildings, electricity, and waste, it's nearly half of all of Canada's emissions that municipalities have an indirect influence over. But the action that municipalities are trying to take, really is dependent on applying to the federal government or provinces for funding, and there isn't a funding model in place to really take the kind of action that's required to meet our climate targets. I think a really good example of this is public transit, where transportation makes up about a quarter of our total emissions. Emissions from the sector are growing. Electric vehicles are going to play an important role here in driving down emissions, but there isn't really a credible path towards our 2030, never mind our 2050 climate targets. Just to electrify passenger vehicles, there needs to be an increased shift to transit and a reduction in total vehicle kilometers traveled. And so, the conversation that FCM is engaged in is around, well, what's the level of service from municipal transit agencies that's needed to get to that mode shift that would get us to our 2030 and our 2050 climate targets, and what's the cost of that, and how do all orders of government work together to fund that? And the current reliance that transit agencies have on fare revenue and property taxes isn't a sustainable funding model in terms of operating costs. And we have a strong partnership currently from the federal government to invest in capital for public transit, but we don't have that sustainable funding model around transit operating. So this is another aspect of the municipal growth framework that we're trying to advance. Next slide, please. That's the overall context around sort of the current municipal finance and the three primary public policy challenges that municipalities are not able to take the kind of action on that's required given the current framework. So what would a new framework look like? These are four objectives that we've so far, since we started this work in June, heard from our members. We need a model that more fairly redistributes existing revenue between orders of government relative to expenditures and service delivery expectations. We need a mixture of municipal revenue. It doesn't just have to be one source of revenue, but a mixture of municipal revenue that's better linked to population growth and economic growth, and more in line with the level of services that municipalities are providing. Municipalities need a mixture of revenue tools that support the full range of services they're providing, especially on the operating side. A lot of provincial and federal funding is for new capital costs and doesn't cover staff costs, doesn't cover the full life cycle costs of operating infrastructure or providing services. So we need more flexibility there in that basket of services. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're looking for is a more diverse set of predictable sources of revenue that enable municipalities to respond to those public policy challenges that I just outlined. Next slide. So there's, broadly speaking, four ways to do this. Municipalities can there's ways that they can do more with existing sources of municipal revenue. There's an argument that we're making that municipalities are really at the limit of what they can do with property taxes and most of the other forms of own source revenue that they have. But that's the first sort of category. Then there's new sources of municipal revenue that would be required through that would require provincial or territorial legislative changes, but new forms of municipal own source revenue. And then there's enhanced or new ways of transferring funding to municipalities from provincial and territorial governments or from the federal government. So what the work that we're doing is to establish a set of objectives, starting with those 4 that I mentioned on the last slide, and develop a set of evaluation criteria to apply to these four categories. And we hope that through this analysis, we can come up with a model that achieves the objectives that we're seeking. I'm gonna pause here and open it up to questions or comments from the board.
Well, thank you, Matt. I do appreciate that. I'll ask our colleagues, should they have a question, to use the ability to ask a question online there, but I will turn it over first and call on Chair Redmond to ask her first question.
Thank you. Matthew, thank you very much for coming. It was a very interesting day. I know I have reported to all of you the participation I had with many leaders in industry, in the construction, bureaucrats right across the whole spectrum and across Canada yesterday. So I'm going to ask if Council would consider waiving a notice of motion. Councillor Erb is prepared to second that, and after that I would be happy to put on the table a motion that supports what we've heard from FCM and what we can do in our part, asking for a new fiscal framework and deal for the region of Waterloo.
So we have a motion to waive notice, I believe moved by Chair Redmond and seconded by Councillor Erb. So any discussion, questions? Councillor Shantz.
Excuse me, my question is about one of the slides. So if you want to carry on with this part first.
Yeah, we'll deal with this notice of waiving of notice motion that was moved by Chair Redmond, seconded by Councillor Erb, and now we are live voting. If you don't mind, Councillor Shantz.
Sorry, I'm not currently in East Sky, but I am in support of this motion.
Okay, and that is carried. So we'll go back to you, Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I appreciate my colleagues voting to waive the need for notice of motion. Clerks is putting the motion up. Because you all received it ahead of time, I'm not going to take the time to read it to you, but to say one of the rationales for this is the fact that municipalities clearly need a new funding source in order to fund the things that we are now putting on the taxpayer. And in the motion, it talks about the fact that it's grown from, I think, $100 million in 2019 to over $170 million in 2023, where we are paying with local funds things that the province should be paying for. At the end of the day, there's only one taxpayer, and we all recognize that. And I think residents and citizens want us to stop pointing our finger at each other and figure out how to do a better way. So I think we need to all come to the table. I think we need to assess the amount of tools that are available currently at the federal and provincial level and find out how they can be designed with accountability mechanisms so municipalities can then afford to pay for the services, provide the services that residents depend on and that they need. And again, I think the timing is ripe. I think that the province has made a new funding deal with the City of Toronto, and while they're a bigger fish in the pond than we are, we too have needs, and we are one of the fastest growing municipalities in the country. So I think that we can make a very legitimate case for this. So thank you very much for supporting it. And Councillor Erb is ready to second it, and I think he wants to speak to the motion.
Councillor Erb.
I'm happy to second it.
Okay, great, Councillor Erb. Any discussion? You want to add your comments now?
I'll,
sure.
If I may, thank you. There's no question the municipalities need a new deal. I think we're at a significant crossroads as to how we proceed with providing services to the community in the future. And do we continue to pick up the shortfall that currently exists because the provincial government is not at the table, or do we aggressively start advocating for a new deal? And I think the time is here where the advocating becomes aggressive. And the longer we continue to fund these services from the tax levy that the provincial government is not funding, the more we normalize this process in the eyes of our residents. Each year, we step up to the plate to make up for a difference that the province doesn't fund. The more the residents just come to expect it from us. However, the normalization that I fear the most is in the eyes of the province. The more Waterloo Region and other municipalities in the province pick up the shortfall, the more the province can say, oh, well, the good folks of Waterloo Region and other municipalities are prepared to pick it up, and we'll just let it go, and we'll have more monies for our coffers. And I don't think we can allow this normalization to continue. I don't think it's fair. It's not sustainable, and what it does, it affects some of the most vulnerable in our communities who are the ones that are suffering because we don't get adequate funding. And so I think it's important that we support this and try and lobby the federal government and the provincial government for a new deal.
Thank you, Councillor Erb. Further discussion, questions? Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. My question was about a slide, but since you've given me the floor, I'll take this opportunity to speak to the motion. I certainly support the motion. I know at this council a couple of years ago, we talked about the fact that we needed more social support, in particular funding, and that it was the right thing to do for us to help our residents where we could. Knowing full well that it was responsibility of other levels of government to provide that funding. So I think absolutely we should be advocating and pushing to have that difference reimbursed to us and supported by the other levels of government. So I support the motion.
Great. Councillor Salonen?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm really happy to support this motion. I am just wondering, though, in reading the therefore be it resolved, I feel it's a little bit weak where it kind of gives the province the chance not to answer. I mean, at AMO, we delegated on this and just got a nice letter of thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. And I'm just curious if there's a way we can add a bit more oomph behind it. Like even in the whereas, the final one saying that a steering committee was struck with the City of Toronto, like maybe suggesting something just beyond collaborating and being open and transparent. I would also say the provincial government claims they've been open and transparent in some of their other dealings that I wouldn't necessarily have the same definition. And I don't want that to get lost because I think this is really important that we do need to look at a new framework. So I don't know. I would leave that to Chair Redmond or Councillor Erb, since it's your motion. Or suggest an amendment as I'm being told. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, then based off of suggestion, I would like to add an amendment, if possible, that we actually suggest this goes directly to the Premier as well as to the new Minister of Finance, and that we get actual feedback directly on the region of Waterloo and our municipal framework so that it's specific and directed at us, and perhaps even throw in a timeline, but I'm open for discussion from my colleagues on their thoughts on that.
Okay, so we're going to let the clerk's staff draw that up. We're going to post it, and then we'll need a mover, so you're going to move that once it's there. Sue, albeit I think you guys have ordered it out. We'll get it written on paper, but Sue will likely second that, and then we'll vote on it and move forward. So give us a minute. Get that up. We're going to take a 5-minute recess to get this put together, and grab a drink, coffee, whatever you want.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order. I was going to suggest the further amendment to include the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, since there's a federal reference to the area municipalities, federal members.
Yep, I think we've been nodding of heads, so I'll let the clerk's staff add that in as well.
And one final thing. I don't know how the process works, but to send it to other municipalities and encouraging them to pass a similar resolution, I think that's not quite covered, unless it's covered by the reference to AMO and FCM, that it gets circulated to other municipalities. So, thank you.
Yeah, hey, Councillor Deutschman, do you want to flip a quick email to me or what have you? Or to Will, rather, if you don't mind? I mean, there is a note in the bottom, a copy of this motion and supporting letter be circulated to all area municipalities, all Waterloo Region members of Parliament and members of Provincial Parliament, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO and FCM.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yeah, I'm aware of that part. I'm just expanding it to include other municipalities. I'll send an email to Will.
Yep, great, thank you.
Thank you.
staff have got something together for everyone to see. They're going to put it up on the screen, and then I'll get Councillor Salonen to read her amendment to the main motion, which we've got a mover and a seconder, but we've got a seconder for this amendment in Councillor Foxton, and then we will go right to a vote on it, and then we'll reconvene discussion and questions on the original motion. Councillor Salonen.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair, and thanks everyone for your patience on letting us type this up. So just to clarify, there's one slight correction to the third point under there for be it resolved, and that is the change to a copy of this motion and supporting letter be circulated to all Ontario municipalities, requesting them to also pass a similar motion. Then continuing on with the rest of the wording, which is all Waterloo Region members of Parliament and members of Provincial Parliament, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And then there's a second, a fourth bullet point that's new, and that is that this be circulated to the Prime Minister, Federal Minister of Finance, the Premier of Ontario, and the Ontario Minister of Finance, requesting a committee or task force be formed to address this issue.
Yeah, okay. Requesting a committee or task force to, so add the TO, be formed to address this issue.
Yes, thank you for the grammatical fix.
All good. Okay, we've got a mover and a seconder. I'll ask you to vote on this amendment, or I guess any discussion. Oh, Councillor Leggett.
Sorry, my scribe's not working here.
And I see Mr. Deutschman's hand too, so I got you in the queue.
Okay, thanks. Is that two committees or one committee? Are we asking them to do a joint committee or task force? Because it just says a committee. Yeah, but two, one each, or one joint?
I mean, I'd like to think in theory they'd want to do a joint one, but I would leave that open for their interpretation unless you have thoughts, Councillor Liggett.
Maybe change the wording to a joint task force or committee, or barring that, separate.
Like a joint
Give them the
between
option.
federal, provincial, you mean? I'm not sure if that'll ever happen, but. Okay.
So it needs to be changed to plural then if.
All right, if you want to make that change, I guess. Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are comments only on the amendment now or the whole motion?
Just the amendment.
Okay, the only thing I wanted to include, just so that the minister's not feeling excluded, would be, and I don't know the proper term, but provincially the Minister of Municipal Affairs, or whatever the proper terminology is, since this is a municipality issue that we're raising.
Okay, we can note that.
Thank you.
Councillor Foxton. Oh, this is for the original? Okay, Councillor Benedict, not the amendment, but your main? Okay. All right, so that being said, I believe we will go to a vote on the amendment that was read by Councillor Salonen, seconded by Councillor Foxton. All those in favor, please indicate on your. Okay, that is carried. Thank you. Back to the original motion discussion. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, Chair. We have to be so careful because slowly it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger what we've had to take on. And you know, I always say, why doesn't anybody fight aggregate with the province at election time? Why do they always come to the municipalities? And it's the same thing we're doing with social services here. And we have to make the public well aware that they are to go after their MPs and MPPs rather than going after the councils, because we have no say. And if we do not send them in the right direction, then we will keep getting dumped on. But if the heat goes to where it's supposed to go, we may get better results.
Okay, Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of brief comments. First, I'd be remiss if I didn't say I wanted to channel my inner Doug Craig, who no doubt is very sad that he's missing this opportunity to comment on this motion, which deals with an issue that, as we all know, Councillor Craig has been pounding the table constantly on about getting us all together at the table to try to come up with a better financial model to deal with all the issues that we continue to deal with at the municipal level. And I just wanted to point out, I think we'll see a slide that shows that our acceptance of provincial responsibilities, our financing of provincial responsibilities is moving in 1 year approximately 15 to 20% more than we paid last year. I believe it's 150 million to over $173 million. And it just keeps growing and growing. This is a desperate, urgent situation. And I thank Chair Redmond for bringing forward this motion and starting this advocacy that I hope will spread across the province. Thank you.
Councillor Verbenovic.
Well, thank you very much. Is Matt still with us, or is he gone?
I believe Matt should still be
there
with
he
us.
is.
There he is. Hey, Matt.
I really just number one wanted to thank Matt for coming and making this presentation today. For those who were at the AGM, they'll recall that this was work that was first announced in a big way at the conference, but has been in the work for some time. And in particular, want to applaud the FCM staff for bringing together folks from all different sectors. In fact, it was back at the time of the economic challenges back in 2008, 9, 10, when FCM first used that approach of bringing all the various partners to the table in order to get the economic stimulus program that at that time the Harper government ended up bringing forward. And as we know, that really turned around Canada's response in relation to the rest of the world, and cities played a big part in the economic stimulus that happened across the country. I think these issues are critical. I mean, quite frankly, we can't be dealing with 21st century problems with 19th century funding tools and funding mechanisms. And that's the reality, whether we were talking about the province of Ontario, the province of British Columbia, or Yukon Territory. These are realities that are being faced in one way or another by all of our cities and communities from coast to coast to coast, and so this national initiative, I think, is really important. I'm pleased and will be supporting the motion that Chair Redmond has brought forward here today. And quite frankly, one of the best things that could happen is if all 2,000 plus FCM members across the country pass similar motions in order to support the advocacy together with other national associations and provincial and other national associations, as well as provincial and territorial municipal associations. So I will be supporting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Verbenovic. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I, too, was just going to acknowledge the leadership and thank Matt for being here to present this. Our strength is in numbers, and the last thing we want as a group of municipal leaders is to have divide and conquer. So this is very much going to be something that FCM is championing, and they are a credible, valued partner of the federal government. And I think back to the first sort of direct funding when I was parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Environment of the Green Fund that flowed money directly to municipalities so that they could implement sustainability and green infrastructure in the decisions that they made. There's also great strength in AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. They too will pick this up. And again, it will be our strength in numbers so that we're not being played one municipality off another. So I thank my colleagues for the support of this. Councillor Craig did email me to say he was fully in support, although he can't be here virtually or physically. So I think he's probably doing a happy dance wherever he is. And again, just really want to thank Matt Gamel for being here and FCM for their leadership in animating this very, very important, could be transformative way we fund the kind of services that residents need.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I too strongly support this motion, and I too received an email from Councillor Craig. And in the 12 years that I worked with him at the City of Cambridge, I don't think there was a single budget that he didn't bring this up. And for all of us, as long as I've been a city councillor and now a regional councillor, whenever going to have CM or AMO, it's always mentioned. And like you, I am very concerned about the increase for the region, for municipalities, of our share that we are taking on and should be done by the provincial and federal governments. So again, I will be voting for this and echo the comments of my colleagues.
Well, thank you, colleagues, and Chair Redmond and Councillor Erb for seconding this very important motion. With that, I guess we'll get everyone's opinion on the matter when we go to a vote. So I'd encourage you to open up your e-scribe. We'll post the amended motion up for everyone to see, and I would encourage you to vote yes or no on e-scribe, please. Councillor Liggett? Thumbs up? Thumbs up. And that is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for this important discussion as we head into our 2024 plan and budget. We have to look at the unsustainability of our funding when it comes to the essential services that residents rely on. We know there isn't a miracle fund out there, and calling on our partners to look at a new fiscal arrangement is a vital step forward to supporting local residents. That being said, I'll now turn it over to Craig Dyer and Connie McDonald to begin the process. So Craig, over to you on the 2024 plan and budget, setting the stage.
Well, thank you. Hope you can hear that okay? Okay. Thank you very much to the chair, and welcome to council, to budget committee rather, for the 2024 plan and budget process. My colleague Connie and I have a presentation for you today to walk you through a few components. If we move to the next slide, please. We've tried to break this up into, let's say, four, easy to digest topics that we'll go through. We'll have an opportunity for questions and conversation at the end of each one. Connie will speak to the strategic plan, the previously approved budget principles, and speak to the engagement process that we'll undertake as part of the 2024 plan and budget. And then I'll speak a little bit with respect to the economic environment and a number of different indicators. I'll give you an overview of where we're at this point with the 2024 budget, and then we'll talk about the process that this committee will go through over the next couple of months to review and ultimately approve the 2024 budget. Next slide, please. We are going to show you some numbers today. We wanted to reinforce that we are still working on the 2024 budget. We are still making adjustments to the 2024 operating budget. We are still making adjustments to the 10-year capital program. So what you'll see today are draft numbers. They are subject to change, but they will give you an order of magnitude of where we're at overall. The preliminary 2024 budget will be tabled at your next meeting on October the 18th, and that information will be available several days in advance. Hello? You're trying to throw me off, aren't you?
Dramatic effect.
It's working. So today's meeting is really about information sharing for you, letting you know where we're at overall with the budget. We'll talk about process, hopefully to make you comfortable with the process that you're going to follow over the next several weeks as we review the budget. Today is not a decision-making day. I'm also very cognizant of the timeline we're working on today. I've been reminded several times that the first pitch is at 4:38. So our intention here will be to get everybody out at 4. And with that, I will turn the mic is now on. I will turn it over to my colleague, Connie McDonald.
Thank you, Craig. I'm coming up to my 3-year anniversary at the region, and in those 3 years, I've never seen Craig Dyer lose his footing. So this is a momentous occasion, and thank you for those manning the mics for letting us have that little moment of joy today. Sorry, Craig. So at the region, we have a planning and performance framework that ensures strategic alignment and helps to determine what resources are needed in our budget. This all starts with the strategic plan. The strategic plan that reflects our community's goals and needs for the future and outlines Council's direction to the organization and our focus for the next 4 years. Each year, we build our annual plan and supporting budget, which outlines the actions that will achieve the strategic plan. If the strat plan is the map, the annual plan and budget determines how and how fast we will get there. Our Director of Corporate Strategy, Jenny Smith, likes to refer to this as the gas pedal. But in the spirit of our climate action goals, I'm going to suggest we think of it as the accelerator for our e-bus in terms of how the plan will align with our strategy for this year. I'm getting some thumbs up. Perfect. So the annual plan and budget centers around establishing the needed service levels for essential services and the initiatives that the organization will take to support service transformation. Behind each of these services and initiatives are our employees, and each employee has a work plan that helps us achieve our stated service levels, which in turn helps achieve the community priorities and ultimately the strategic plan. Next slide. So this year's plan and budget process is exciting as we have a new strategic plan set by you and informed by thousands of community members and employees. During the strat plan process, we talked a lot about the kind of community we want to live in the future. As we grow to 1 million people in the coming decades, our new strategic plan is centered on growing with care. Care meaning the care and compassionate kind of community that we all wish to experience, but also care meaning intentionality. If we are going to grow with care, we have to focus on having homes for all. That means moving quickly to create affordable, accessible, and equitable housing, eliminating chronic homelessness and reliance on traditional shelter models, investing in upstream solutions to reduce housing and economic precarity, and unlocking regional land that supports community growth. We have to focus on climate-aligned growth and using a climate adaptation lens to reimagine our infrastructure, land, and services for growth. We have to foster car alternative options through complete streets and extended alternative transportation networks. And we need to steward our natural environment and shared resources as we grow. We also need to make sure that services and opportunities are equitable for all, ensuring that our services are inclusive, accessible, culturally safe, and appropriate, and that we're designing equitable regional services that meet local community needs and that also explore new models of service through community collaboration and partnership. And last, we have to have a resilient and future-ready organization that provides a great place to work, where our nurses and our personal support workers and our transit operators and our paramedics and our airport staff and our IT professionals, you get the picture, where they all feel safe and supported to be innovative and bold and take risks in the name of better service for residents. And this means fostering an empowered, people-centered culture, reconciling past injustices to advance our future together, exploring new service models and partnerships to achieve fiscal resilience and better service. We will spend time at each budget meeting going through the strategic plan areas in a lot more detail. But this overarching vision that you have set is what we will anchor the plan and budget process in to meet your strategic priorities in support of our rapidly growing community. Next slide. So this year we kicked off our plan and budget process in a transition planning session from planning to action last month. We heard a lot from you about the big strategic needs and initiatives and also got a lot of feedback. We also heard from you about the influencers of success and what we need to do together. Things like collaboration, advocacy, which we've already touched on today, streamlining of processes and innovation. These have been really valuable insights from you, and you will see them come through as we address each strategic priority and incorporate the feedback that you've provided on those plans. Next slide. So through our strategic planning process, we held extensive engagement with thousands of members of the community and staff. Our 2024 plan and budget will continue that conversation, continuing our commitment to community to not continue to ask them the same question over and over again and expect a different answer. We'll lean heavily on the information engagement that we already have, that we know, based on those conversations. But we're also continuing that conversation out in community. Some examples include getting out to community events across the region, including farmers markets in Kitchener and Cambridge, community centers in Wellesley, Woolwich, Wilmot, and North Dumfries, and other community events. We'll also be connecting with residents as part of the public health clinics in neighborhoods where communities are often unheard from. And this week, we'll launch our online survey for our Engage page. And last, of course, there are the public input meetings, 3 of them that are as part of the Strategic Plan and Budget Committee dates. Next slide. So I'm going to take you back to June. I believe it was June. Each year we work with you to establish some guiding principles that help us to set the plan and budget, which is incredibly important as demand for services increases, the community grows, and the pressures increase. I think we've had a lot of conversation about this already this morning. And so earlier in June, you helped us set principles that supported staff in guiding their work thus far on the plan and budget process. You can go to the next slide. And you can see here just a reminder of those principles that you directed staff to keep in mind during that process. Making sure that we're, building on past success and strategic investments, making sure that we're meeting growing resident service demands, looking at federal and provincial funding areas of responsibility, and many, many more. And so those will continue to be guiding principles as we bring the plan and budget process forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig, unless there are any questions on the upfront portion there.
Okay, we'll entertain questions from colleagues. I don't see any as of yet. Oh, Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I just had a question on slide 4. And I was just wondering what is meant by performance development plans and also the phrase ongoing performance measurement, tracking, and service improvement activities. So I just wasn't sure what that meant.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, happy to answer that question. So performance development plans are a plan that each leader at the region has in place that outlines, based on the strategic plan and our organizational goals, what actions that individual employee is responsible for achieving that year. It also includes cultural goals in terms of the kind of place that we want to work in and how as a leader they're helping to lead the organization in that way. Separate from that is ongoing performance measurement and tracking, and that's things like, we bring to you a quarterly report on our progress in achieving our annual plan and budget. It also will hopefully include new ways of telling our story and reporting back to the community on how we're achieving the strat plan. You may also recall our first sort of yearbook that we launched last year that was 12 stories of change. And so we're also working to tell those stories in different, more meaningful ways for the community so that they can see the kind of work that the region's doing.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have anyone else, so.
Over to Craig.
I'll turn over to Craig. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. I'm going to spend a few minutes just providing an overview of some of the economic indicators that we're seeing and what's changed over the last little while. And before I do that, we spent a little bit of time thinking about the environment that we find ourselves in today and what it was like a year ago as we launched into the 2023 budget process. And we described, you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, this is how we described the 2023 budget. And I'm not a huge fan of the perfect storm analogy, but we did use it at the time because we were experiencing high inflation and the rising cost of borrowing and significant capital cost escalation, fuel prices going up, a housing crisis, growing homelessness population, and plenty of service expansion to meet a rapidly growing population here in Waterloo region. And when we fast forward a year until now, our observation is that not a whole lot has changed. Most of what you see on that left-hand side of the screen is applicable when it comes to our current environment. Certainly things have changed somewhat, and I'll show you some of those changes. But we find ourselves in a very similar situation, and to Chair Harris's introductory comments about the difficulty of the 2024 budget and how challenging it has been to put together, dealing with a number of the economic factors that we find ourselves in. And just, a comment on population, with the region being one of the fastest growing communities, not just in the province, but in the country, we feel these impacts in a significant way. And as we've talked to you before about, it's partly about from a capital perspective, it's about looking after all of the infrastructure we already have that's in and on the ground, but also planning for growth over the next 30 years. And that creates a number of financial challenges for us as we go forward. But just to give you some idea of what some of the numbers look like, if we go to the next slide, and we'll start with inflation. So the inflation story is one of rapid increase arising. Starting from the lows that we experienced in the early days of COVID, peaking. I can't quite see the dates, but it looks like sometime in 2023 at over 8%, and now falling, and now down into the 3 and 4%. So on the one hand, you might think, okay, well, inflation is falling at a reasonably quick pace, and that's good. But we have to remember that the 3 or 4% that we're experiencing right now is on top of the 8% that we experienced a year ago, and on top of the 4 or 5% that was the year before that. So the cumulative impact of inflation, both in terms of consumer price index, and we'll see in a moment on capital cost escalation as well, is significant. The narrative appears to be at this point that inflation will be with us, at perhaps at a higher rate and for longer, and the same will go for interest rates, as you'll see in just a moment. And if we go to the next slide and look at capital cost escalation, the numbers are even more dramatic, as we've shown you again over the last couple of years. So while the headline inflation is in the range of 4%, we're currently experiencing capital cost escalation in the range of 8%, which is on top of the 17% from the year before and on top of the 12% the year before that. And so we see that in terms of the cost of our capital program. From a borrowing perspective, a year ago, I think I would have said that we were experiencing the cost of borrowing was probably the highest that we've seen in 10 years. And 3 months ago, I would have said the cost of borrowing is the highest we've experienced in the last 13 years. And today, it's the highest we've experienced in the last 16 years. So the cost of borrowing, as measured by a Government of Canada 10-year bond, is at the highest rate it's been since the fall of 2007. And I was looking at another chart earlier today, and it occurred to me that it took 13 years to get from the level we're at now down to the lows in the early 2020s. So 13 years to go from, say, 4.2% down to 1%-ish, and only 3 years to come back up. So to Councillor Foxton's comments early on in terms of the impact that this is having in the economy, this is a significant increase in interest rates in a very short period of time. And it's the combination of those two that make it so significant. For us, municipalities, when we're borrowing to fund our capital infrastructure, and certainly for consumers in terms of the impact of mortgage and other types of loans. So definitely something we're keeping a close watch on. A little bit about fuel prices. It's an interesting story. If we follow the dark blue line, the thickest one there, at the start of the year, we were in the $1.80 range. This is for diesel. This is where our most significant exposure is, particularly through our Grand River Transit bus fleet. And we saw actually a fairly rapid and significant price reduction over the course of the first 2 quarters or so of this year, and settled into a much lower rate over the course of the summer, until about the middle of July or early August when it started to come up again. So we're seeing fuel prices, our current cost in the range of $1.60 a liter. We're certainly not seeing the significant budget impact for fuel in 2024 as we did in 2023, because we did make some adjustments over the course of the last budget. And then from an unleaded perspective, which is basically the vast majority of the rest of our fleet, including our ambulances and police vehicles and many other pieces of equipment, a little more stable. The prices have not changed in the same way that diesel has. Our average is so far this year is in the $1.35 range. So. We're not quite seeing the fluctuations that we're seeing on the diesel side. So that's certainly encouraging for us from a budget perspective. Now, development charge revenue. So I just want to take a minute to explain this slide because it's significant. So what you're looking at is going from left to right from 2019. I'll take you through the first 4 bars here. So 2019 to 2022, this is the development charge revenue that we've collected. That's the blue piece. And then the green part of it is where we have funded exemptions for various reasons. So there's the main thing to note is the significant increase in revenue generated in 2022 relative to the previous year. So our collections increased significantly. And then the significance of the 2 bars on the right, these are year-to-date August figures comparing 2022 and 2023. So 2022 was a record year of development charge collections for us, and 2023 is trending slightly above 2022. So a significant amount of development activity happening within the region, and I think our projections would see us, I think at this point at least getting to last year's collection level and probably a little bit higher. And that bodes well for us in terms of funding some of our growth-related infrastructure. It means maybe we don't have to borrow quite as much because we have more money in the reserve, and that's very helpful because on the previous slide you saw how high the cost of borrowing was. So that's very encouraging for us as we put our capital plan together for next year. If we go to the next slide, assessment growth. An interesting story here as well. We had almost 2% assessment growth in 2023. So this would be growth in 2022 for the 2023 budget. Our average over the last 10 years running in, say, the 1.6% range. Our projection of growth this year for next year's budget is also around 2%. And I can say that as of Monday, we were at 1.91%. So we're getting very close to that number. There's another full month of input that our colleagues at MPAC will be doing between now and the end of this month, and then we'll have our final numbers sometime in the month of November. But at this point, we're confident that we're going to achieve that 2% range, which we had predicted earlier in the year. So through the chair, I'm just going to pause there. That's kind of the end of the first segment of my presentation. And if there's any questions on what you've heard so far, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
And there are. We would encourage colleagues also to use the e-scribe to ask questions so we can make sure we flag everyone on the system. But I'll start with Councillor Hunick, and I believe Councillor Foxton has a question. So Councillor Hunick.
Through you, Chair Harris. Craig, you mentioned that the inflation rate at its peak was 8%, and now it's fallen to about 4%. So I'm not quite understanding that because I'm not entirely a math brain. But am I to understand then that the combined inflation rate is 12%? What I mean is I don't understand how the inflation rate is dropping, because still, when I go to the store to buy something, it's more expensive than it was 4 months ago. So help me.
I will do my best to help you. And perhaps we could just go back to that first inflation slide. So I've got the right numbers. And I'm just going to think for a second about the best way to describe this. So when Statistics Canada, when they calculate inflation, the inflation rate is always a year-over-year measure. So let's take a say a simple example where, say, 2 years ago, the price of a given product, say it was $100. Okay, so if we had 8% inflation a year later, that 100 becomes 108. Okay, and now a year later, it's 4% on top of that 108. Which will take you to 112 and change. So the point I was trying to make was be mindful of, be careful about the conclusions that are being drawn about inflation being lower. So yes, inflation is lower now than it was a year ago, but that doesn't mean prices are lower. It means prices are higher than the rate that we had the year before that. And so this was my comment about you have to look at the cumulative impact. 8% 1 year, and then 4% is on that elevated level already.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Very much so, and that's confirming what I thought. Thank you.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, Craig, and I think you're doing a great job. One thing we haven't brought in that I don't expect you to have now, but down the road, is how much we've saved going to electric vehicles. I'd like to know down the road how that has helped us financially and the possibilities of looking at going at more based upon what you find. Thank you.
Yes, we can certainly bring that information forward.
Councillor James.
Hi, thank you, through you, Chair Harris. Thank you, Craig. I have a question about slide 17, I think it is, if you can pull that up. Has to do with the development charges. Okay, so on the right side, there is the revenue, and then there's the exemptions, and it's year to date essentially. Why is there such a disparity between like the 7.7 and the 23.8 in terms of the exemptions?
Yeah, through the chair, it's all a function of the growth that's happening in the community. So development charges are assessed at the time that a building permit is issued. And I think what this is telling us is we have had a significantly greater amount of growth in 23 as compared to 2022 of development that's eligible for an exemption. So for example, or a discount rather. So we have the region's development charge policy with respect to industrial development allows for a 60% discount of the full rate. And because that is a discretionary discount, that discount has to be funded. So I would speculate a little bit by suggesting that I think most of that increase in 2023 has been additional industrial building permits being taken out that were eligible for the discount as compared to 2022. And it varies from year to year, especially on industrial. We tend to see maybe some consistency year over year from a residential perspective. Industrial comes and goes, and one significant permit can have this kind of impact on our industrial discount.
affordable homes qualify as exemptions? Building affordable housing? Sorry, Craig.
Okay, I'm going to say, looking at this chart, I'd say for 2023, the answer would be no, because those exemptions are now provided for in the Development Charges Act. It's not a discretionary exemption that the region needs to fund.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying.
Councillor Deutschmann.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Mr. Dyer, just a couple questions. First, impact of Bill 23 on development charge revenue. What can we anticipate? Will there be an impact going forward?
So through the chair, the short answer is yes, there will be an impact going forward. The impact will be felt in a few different ways. The ones that come to mind right now are there's a requirement for a 5-year phase-in of a development charge rate when a new bylaw is established. So when a municipality goes through the background study process and puts a new development charge bylaw into effect, those rates, and I'm not talking about the increase, but I'm talking about the rate itself, has to be phased in over a 5-year period. And so that phase-in will definitely have a cost to the municipality. We have not, of course, done a background study, so we're not really able to quantify that just now. But at some point, we will bring the topic of the next background study forward to to the Administration Finance Committee for consideration. That's probably early in the new year when we will bring that forward. So that's the first impact. The second impact is there are mandatory discounts that apply to rental housing, depending on the size of the unit. So that will have an impact on the amount of development charges collected. And then the other two that come to mind is that there are certain costs that were formerly eligible for DC recovery that are now no longer eligible, and that includes the cost of studies. So that's something we'll have to take into account when we do our next bylaw. And we are still awaiting further clarification with respect to the definition of affordable housing and the definition of attainable housing. And we're waiting for more guidance from the province on what both of those will look like. We got some indication through the introduction of Bill 134 last week about what the affordable discounts might look like, and staff are reviewing that draft legislation and intend to report back to committee later this month.
So just to clarify, when you say the cost of the studies, you're talking about the DC studies? They're not even allowing us to add that in?
So through the chair, that would be one example of a study. Others might be sub-watershed studies, official plans, any study that is, let's say, not related to a specific capital project, but is more general in nature, will not be able to be funded by development charges going forward. And if I may, one more item just came to mind. We're waiting for regulation from the province with respect to land acquisition, because the province has indicated its intent to identify services for which land acquisition will no longer be a DC eligible expense.
And just my second question, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dyer, in that slide, when it shows the significant increase in development charges collected, but at the same time, we hear from builders in the home construction industry who are not necessarily building as many as we would like to see, and we're not necessarily meeting those annual targets. Are these DC charges comprised of a lot of industrial, commercial? I can't imagine commercial, but what is it that's driving the significant rise in our development charge collections?
So through the chair, so I think it's a combination of both some significant residential developments and some very large industrial developments as well. And just thinking ahead to future reporting, when we do our Q3 financial update to council, I think we typically include an overview of both residential and non-residential collections. We'll make sure we do that this time to help answer that question.
Thank you. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig, for your presentation. And just to clarify then, that extra non-collectible, the green band in your graph, for housing, to Councillor James' question, is that taken up by the province? Is the province reimbursing us for that? Because I think you said that it's not our responsibility as a region.
Yeah, so perhaps we could just put that development charge slide back up on the screen. Yeah, I should probably make sure I'm clear here. What we're trying to show on this slide is two things. So the larger blue component of the bar is the actual revenue that we've collected and that gets deposited into our reserve funds and that we then use to fund growth-related infrastructure. The green portion represents discretionary exemptions and discounts. So where council, through its bylaw, is allowing for either a discounted development charge or an exempt development charge, we need to fund those exemptions and discounts in order to keep the development charge reserves whole. And what we're seeing here is a significant increase in that cost in 2023, much of which relates to industrial development. And I'm just going to check with our DC expert to see if I'm right on that. And he is nodding, so I feel much better now.
So where does that 28 million come from?
That funding comes from the region, and so we budget for it in both our tax-supported budget and in our water and wastewater budgets as well.
So it comes from the levy and the wastewater charges.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have any other questions as of right now, Craig, so if you want to carry on.
Thank you. So we'll continue on with the conversation and move into a high-level overview of the 2024 budget, give you a sense of where we're at this point, and a little bit of the work that we still need to do. Just a reminder in terms of the overall amount of tax revenue that's out there, that municipalities receive about 9% of the total amount of taxes that are generated in any particular year. Pretty sure this was consistent with what we saw in the earlier presentation. And I should note a lot of alignment between what our colleague from FCM was saying today and the messaging that we've been delivering to this council and previous councils around the inadequacy of the property tax when it comes to funding the range of services that we have in place. Overall, so again, just from a context, so the next few slides are a little bit about context before we get into the numbers. So an average residential property tax bill would look something like this, with the regional share in the 54-55% range. And then we have the local service share and then the education component as well. We've calculated this based on a typical average residential property, which of course is assessed based on a January 1st, 2016 current value, which I know is getting harder and harder to explain and to understand. That value, which has now been in place, I think for 7 years, is going to remain in place for 2024. The province has given that direction. So we wait to see what a future announcement might look like in terms of an assessment update across the province. But we'll be sticking with 2016 values for at least the 2024 taxation year. And to try to connect a little bit with the earlier slides from my colleague Connie MacDonald, you might recognize this slide from the orientation sessions that we did about a year or so ago in terms of the purpose. Like, why are we doing this? Why do we go through the budget process, the plan and budget process each year? Well, of course, it's to help you achieve the strategic objectives and outcomes that you've determined both through the strategic plan and ultimately through the annual business plan. It's to establish service levels. It's to establish the property tax levy and user rates and various fees and charges. So that's the process that we will walk you through over the next 8 months or so. And the context, of course, here is, we work from a higher level regional official plan, the strategic plan that Connie spoke to earlier, a variety of program-specific master plans which set out future infrastructure requirements and desired service levels that we intend to achieve. We build in there the asset management plan, which is the part of looking after all the assets we have in and on the ground right now. And that brings us to an annual business plan. What are the service levels that this council is directing staff to deliver in 2024, and what are the resources needed in order to deliver those service levels? So a little bit about this slide. Councillor Erb commented on this in the earlier conversation when our FCM colleague was here. And we started to show this slide, I can't remember now if it was last year or the year before. And we've been very careful about how to describe this. And we're describing this as the amount of the tax levy that is used to fund services that should be funded by provincial revenues. And I say that should be because in most other provinces that is the case. And the nature of these services do not lend themselves well to be funded by the property tax. So it's not to fund services that are the province's responsibility. The province has said these are a municipal responsibility. What we're saying is at a high level, there are a number of services that we deliver that have broader income redistribution or social equity objectives that don't lend themselves well to a property tax. And we thought, so the number based on the 2023 budget was $147 million. So the first thing we said, well, let's go back 5 years and see what that number was. And the number 5 years ago, if I can see it, was $103 million. And based on the budget that we are assembling at this point, we expect to be in the area of $173 million. So there's two messages from this. The first is the number is significant, right? It was 22% of our levy in 2023. And the second is it's growing quickly. And we've seen that in terms of the incremental tax levy provisions, I'm going to say predominantly in the areas of housing and homelessness over the last 5 years. That's where we see some of the most significant increase. But then also seeing it in terms of paramedic services and the significant increase in resources that this council and previous councils have approved on the paramedic services side. So something for council to consider as we walk through the 2024 budget over the next several weeks is the overall impact that these services are having on our tax levy going forward. And I think I've spoken to all of this, so let's go to the next slide. And then just to remind council, Connie spoke earlier to the budget principles that were approved back in June. There was also a motion passed in June giving direction to staff to report back with what a budget would look like that was in the range of 6 and 8%. Recall that we were projecting a 10% increase or so back in June. So we're continuing to work on this. Our intention will be to present to council a base budget, a list of proposed service expansions, and a list of potential expenditure and service level reductions in order to achieve 8% and a 6% increase. And that will be part of the package that will be delivered to you for the meeting on October the 18th. So where are we at and what has changed? So if you can see this slide okay, I'll just walk you through it. It's an important one. The first column of numbers is the projection that we made in, that staff made in May and that was presented in the June report. And we had anticipated at that time a levy increase of about $54 million. We had assessment growth at about 1.75%, and that would have given us a base budget impact of about 7.9%. We add service expansions onto that, and we get close to 10%. So that was the number that we were working with in the June report. Where we're at right now is a better position than we were anticipating back in June, and there's a couple of significant reasons for that. But our position right now is closer to 45 million in terms of a levy increase. We've upped our assessment growth increase from 1.75%. We've upped it by 1/4 point, so we're now at 2. And that would give us a base budget impact of 6%. And then we would have service expansions on top of that that would take us to a little over 7.5%. Now, there's one significant qualifier to this, which I will mention a couple of times today, and it's the note at the bottom of the table. The position that we have on this slide and that we'll show you today does not include funding for the plan to end chronic homelessness. And that's because that plan is currently under development. The intention will be to bring that plan forward to the Community and Health Services Committee meeting on November the 7th, and then to have further conversation with the Strategic Planning and Budget Committee on November the 8th. And so rather than speculating on what the number might be, we've chosen for now to leave it out and present that not so much as a disclaimer, but as a qualifier, so that you know when we say we're currently sitting at 7.6%, that doesn't include the plan to end chronic homelessness. So we'll build that into the process as it comes forward in November. And so you might, so the obvious question then is, well, leaving the plan to end chronic homelessness aside, why are we in a better position now than we were when we projected back in May, right? A totally legitimate question. And I would say well, we've put 4 reasons down here. The first is we've actually gone through the effort of creating the budget at a very detailed level. When we do our modeling, right, it's at a higher level. We make a number of assumptions that gets us into the ballpark. Now that we've gone through, we've created our detailed budgets. That's part of the reason the number is a little bit lower. More significantly is that provincial funding assumptions that we made back in the spring have turned out to be, what's the right word? We're in a better place than we thought we would be back in the spring. And most significantly would have been the announcement at the AMO conference about the continuation of the mitigation funding for public health, which is now being moved back into the base budget. So it's no longer mitigation funding as of next year. They've put it in the base budget. We had budgeted for it to be removed because that was the direction we were being given at the time. So that's a $2.5 million levy impact right there. And then similarly on the children's services side, we had budgeted for the removal of administration funding that had previously been announced. We don't have confirmation of that yet, but our sense is that funding will continue into 2024. So a better position from a provincial funding perspective. And as you're all aware, we've had a significant uptick in our Grand River Transit ridership over the course of September. And that's allowed us to do 2 things. One, it's allowed us to recast our projection for 2023 which is now suggesting a much more favorable position than we were anticipating back in the summer. And it's allowed us to increase the budget for fare revenue into 2024. And then we have a slightly higher assessment growth. So when we package all that together, it puts us in a better position now than we had originally anticipated back in June. And I know that's a lot to explain. Maybe I'll just pause there and
That's a good.
be curious to know whether that makes sense to everybody.
Well, we will find out as we have some questions. Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I actually have two questions. The assessment growth of 2%, Craig, I'm baffled why we're still in the 2016 valuation. So as our assessment grows, what are they based on? Are they based on the 2016 assessment tables? I have no idea why we're stuck in 2016, so can you explain that to me? I mean, I know who's making the decision. It isn't us.
Yes, that's a different question. I'll do my best to answer. So first of all, the technical answer to why this is being done is because that's the directive that the province has given to MPAC, that every property in the province will be assessed based on its value at January 1st, 2016. And so we've had a common assessment valuation date since the late 1990s. It was being updated periodically like it should be. But we're now in a situation where we're going into year 8 of a 2016 value. And so for example, for a new property that's built now, notwithstanding what it would sell for on the open market, MPAC has to give it I'm going to say a notional value. They give it a value, what they think the value of that property would have been on January 1st, 2016. Because it's the only way to attempt to create equity, if you will, right? And so in order for us to set tax rates on an equitable basis, all the properties have to be assessed at the same time period. And so again, a brand new property built now is given a January 1st, 2016 value. And it will remain so until direction is given by the province to MPAC to do a province-wide assessment update. That would bring the valuation date up to January 1st, 2023, perhaps, right? It will all depend on, you kind of have to work backwards. So if the province was going to do something for the 2025 taxation year, they would probably need to give instructions to MPAC by the end of this year or early next year, because there's a whole bunch of work then for MPAC to do to provide the new assessment values. Does that answer the question?
It does, and it explains why we are in a very, I shouldn't say untenable, because the whole province is in this spot, but I still have no idea why we're stuck on that valuation, but I appreciate the reference. The other question I had is on slide 24, and it's a very troubling slide because it looks at the property tax base that's being used to infill other needs. I'm assuming that the 100 million going to 147 million, going to 173 million will continue to grow. And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Part of this is just predicated on the growth within our community, and part of it's predicated on decisions we have made. And I think about paramedics and adding to that service. So it's a combination of pure growth. I guess my question, is it a combination of pure growth and then decisions council has made over time?
Through the chair, I think that's an accurate assessment. If we think about paramedic services, for example, this council and previous councils have a long-standing track record now of adding paramedic services resources through every budget, and that's partly simply to deal with the growth in the community and the increase in call volumes and other issues. But a big part of that is about growth. I think where we're seeing the most significant increase, I'm just having a look at the chart here, I think it would be fair to say that it's on the housing and homelessness side and on paramedic services. This council has provided, regional councils have provided a significant increase in funding for affordable housing, for homelessness programs over the last several years. And I think that that's in direct response to the pressures that we're seeing and the needs in the community.
And of the services listed, this is my final question. Which ones are cost shared? Is Children's Services and OW Allowance two of the cost shared programs, so they're not 100-cent dollars that we're investing, correct?
Yes, that's correct. At a high level, I would say, so paramedic services, we have a 50-50 cost sharing ratio with the province. The province does provide a small amount of funding for homelessness, but it's not on a cost shared basis. Employment and income support admin also shared on a 50-50 basis. Public health, theoretically, 75-25. In actual fact, closer to 70-30. And Children's Services does receive a significant amount of provincial funding as well.
Thank you.
Councillor McCabe.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation to Connie and to you, Craig. Just to pick up on the Chair's points, Chair Redmond's points. You know, there is that 173 million is really significant, but I think while we certainly need provincial and federal dollars, I'm not suggesting we don't. Absolutely agree with that motion. I think it was, wise to continue to invest in those services because they really are preventative, and goodness knows what our communities may look like if previous councils hadn't done that. So just wanted to recognize that. But my question, just to help me sort of put it into round numbers, that the money that we feel the province, or we know that the province and the federal government, like the 150 million, what is that in as a tax levy for us? Just do the math quickly.
Whatever 150 divided by 7 is.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's say 20%-ish. Between 20 and 25%.
Of our tax.
So when we did the math in 2023, the $147 million was 22% of our tax levy.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think that, and then I'm also just wondering when right now we're projected at a 7.6% increase, but I note that plan for ending chronic homelessness isn't in there, and neither is the police budget. So those are two items to come, more than just one. But 7.6, what is that in round numbers?
Sorry, when you say round numbers, do you mean in terms of the impact on a typical household?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just do some quick math. I'll have you that answer in a minute.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we talk about the capital budget and projects, are you able to provide us with whether we're on target, and if not, how far back it goes as to capital projects that are not either in the loop or haven't been started? So where we are currently, and if there are capital projects that, if they've been on the budget for so long and yet haven't started, can we just delete some of those so we're not carrying them forward all the time?
Yeah, a very good question. Through the chair, I can try that in a couple of different ways. In terms of the progress that we're making on the current year's capital program, we'll be providing an update on that in our Q3 financial update in a month or so. So we'll have an update on spending to date and projections to year end. And we take those projections to year end in account as we're putting our 2024 capital program and the forecast together as well. So we would look at, among other things, which projects are underway, which ones will be complete by the end of the year, how much do we expect will be carried over to complete a project next year, and then Each department looks every year at their 10-year forecast and adjusts projects for a number of different reasons. It could be a change in need, a change in scope. It could be progress on, on initial work, whether it's a utility relocation or a property acquisition. We're constantly looking at the capital program and adjusting it for what we think is the most likely level of expenditure in the following year. And when we table the budget on the 18th, that will include a full list of all the projects that we intend to deliver in 2024 and over the 10-year forecast.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again. So are you saying that we have none that are unfunded currently or from previous years? Because that's what it sounds like.
Through the chair, I just want to make sure I understand the question. If the question is, do we have any projects that are unfunded? I think the simple answer to that is no, because all of the projects that are approved in the capital program have a funding and financing source. So we're either funding a project either through a capital reserve or through long-term borrowing. Now, it doesn't mean we've done all the borrowing that we need to do, but we know how a given project is going to be funded. And so when we put the 2024 budget together, staff will look at the 2023 projects and estimate the extent to which they'll be complete by the end of this year to determine how much rolls over into the following year. And then we add new projects to that list, and that gives us our capital program. So the work we'll do in 2024 is twofold. It's A, finishing off projects that have already started, and initiating brand new projects.
So I'm going to assume we have none that are stagnant other than perhaps tenders, things like that.
So, so I'm just trying to think, I'm thinking of the right way to answer it. I think the right answer would be that the cash flow of that project to reflect that delay. There are certainly projects that were approved in 2023 that haven't proceeded as fast as we had originally anticipated. That's something that happens every year for all kinds of different reasons. We'll look at that as we're preparing our 2024 budget, because we don't want to be, adding in, we have to take into account the work that's not completed this year before we start adding on all kinds of work for next year. And that is an absolutely essential part of the process that we go through.
Okay, thank you. That's my concern. Thanks.
Councillor McCabe. You're up.
Thank you for your patience. So the answer to your question is about $125.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for doing that. I just think that's a helpful kind of round number for us to keep in mind as we go through this process. Thank you.
Councillor Huenick.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Considering that the plan to end homelessness is not yet in the budget estimates, I'm wondering of the likelihood of the province funding all or part of the plan to end homelessness, and would we know that by the time budget day rolls around?
Through the chair, I think our assumption with respect to the plan to end chronic homelessness is that we're not at this point anticipating additional funding for homelessness programs from the province. And so the decision for council will be a level of service decision and I think a speed of implementation decision, knowing that the money will very likely come from the levy.
Thank you. I have a second question, if that's okay, Chair Harris. I saw somewhere in the slide deck, forgive me that I don't know where it is, there's a projected public transit increase of 25 cents as of July 1st. I'm wondering how that will compare to municipalities with similar service levels of public transit. Is that a standard level of increase? Considering that we increased last year, I'm concerned about that.
Through the chair, so the proposal on the cash fare is really about, it's actually more about simplifying the coin boxes that we use today and trying to incentivize more moving over to the electronic fare and the cards. So the fare card payment is very, so that one has a very small increase in the draft proposal that I think it's in one of the later slides that Craig put forward. And so the objective is to not have to use any quarters in the coin machines. And then at the same time, I think there's other, and that will come in the more detailed discussion on giving more alternative payment options to make it easier to not use cash. So it's not really about the fare itself. It's really about trying to move people away from cash fares and into alternative fare payment modes.
So I just want to let my council colleagues know that I take issue with that because there are people that can't afford to pay fares in advance, and there are services like Mobility Plus that don't accept advance payment. So.
Craig or...
So perhaps, Mr. Chair, perhaps we go back to the slides. I've got 6 or 7 more slides in this part of the deck, and then we're almost done. We'll just talk a little bit about process.
We do have 4 more questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want to hammer through those questions and then carry on, or?
I'm at your disposal.
Yeah.
I can go through it quickly.
Yeah. Folks, what do you think? Councillor Erb, do you want to jump in on a question, or would you like to move on?
I have a question on slide 27, if I may.
Okay.
The base budget tax impact, can you help me understand that? So that the 6% is the base budget without any service expansion? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, that's correct. It's essentially the cost of doing what we're doing right now.
Status quo.
Status quo.
Status quo. Okay. Second question, in 23, I think 1% was 6.4 million or something like that. Did I hear you say it's 7 million for 24?
Ish, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Deutschman, how about we got 3 more questions, we'll go through them, and then we'll get to the next set of decks. So, Councillor Deutschman?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe later, just on the Councillor Hunick's question and the answer from that too, raised some question in my mind about the equity of, who are the people that are using cash in transit, and we're looking at, if I understand that correctly, a higher fare increase for people using cash than people who do not use cash. So that's just something, just a comment. Craig, on the impact valuations, it always seems to be a political issue that raises community concerns and government angst over valuations of properties. And my concern is the longer the delay in getting us out of 2016, heading towards an election year, we might very well be stuck in this situation until post next election. But I just wanted to know, is there a way of summarizing what being frozen at 2016 means to a high growth community like Waterloo Region?
So through the chair, there are. Let me start with this. So there's 2 components to calculating a tax bill. So one is the municipal levy, and one is the assessment. So the fact that properties are assessed based on a January 1st, 2016 value has no bearing whatsoever on the region's levy. It doesn't affect your budget in any way. The region and the local municipalities will levy what they feel is the right amount of money. The impact comes when the longer the assessments are out of date, then there's more and more potential that you've got properties that are paying more in taxes than they should, and others that are paying less than they should. And so the longer you leave a reassessment update, the more likely it is that you're going to have significant shifts between types of property. And that could be from, one residential house to another residential house. It could also be between classes. So if just as an example, if the residential property class was increasing by, 50%, and commercial properties were only increasing by 10%, then because you haven't done the reassessment, basically you've got commercial properties that are paying way more taxes than they should, right? And so you end up with a misalignment of the taxes that are being paid at a property level. And so the value in keeping the assessed value up to date is that you're at least approximating what the appropriate responsibility for a particular property is. And the longer you wait, the more difficult it is to implement a reassessment because you have a greater potential for significant tax shifts between properties. And that becomes a problem.
All right, that's a great explanation. Thank you for that. If you just go to page 27 slide, there were just two questions there. One was the tax levy increases less, and I was wondering whether that was due to, one, the deeper dive, two, increased revenue, and then provision for service expansion. Were there specific service expansions, or is this an estimated increase for service expansion?
Yeah, so on the first question, the difference is a combination of those four factors that are listed. I think the two most significant are the change in provincial funding and the increased GRT fare revenue. I think, those were the most impactful in terms of us being in a better position right now. And then I'm sorry, can you ask your second question?
Provision for service expansion, the 1.6, what was that?
Yes, service expansion. So when we did our modeling back in April and May, we made a number of assumptions about what service expansions might come forward. That landed at 1.8%. The 1.6% is going to be very close to what the actual number is. We're just finalizing a couple of items.
Thank you, Councillor Deutschman. Councillor Urbanovic.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Can we leave that slide up, please? Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. First of all, there was a reference to capital and so on in one of the earlier questions, and the fact that when the budget comes forward, the capital budget is in a balanced position and so on. But this position right now doesn't cover off the plan to end chronic homelessness. I presume when you say that, you mean it doesn't cover it off from an operating perspective or an operating or capital perspective?
Through the chair, the short answer is both.
Okay. So on that, presumably council could reprioritize capital projects during the budget review and prioritize items in the plan to end chronic homelessness over and above other items that staff have identified?
Absolutely.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that. On the issue of the June budget position versus where we are now, I mean, certainly, we're in a bit of a better situation, which will make some of the work, I think, a little easier going forward. But is it fair to say that between June and now, probably the challenges for ratepayers have become more significant. I mean, we've seen some further interest rate increases in that time period. We're starting to see some softening of the job market and continued price inflation. So is it fair to say that, one of the things we'll need to factor that, for some people in our community, arguably to a certain degree, everyone, things are probably a little more challenging than they were a few months ago?
Through the chair, I mean, that may be a better question for councillors, but generally speaking, I think it's something that councillors should absolutely take into account in any budget year, is the ability to pay of the tax base. Absolutely.
Yeah, no. So, but where I'm going specifically is there have been additional pressure points financially on the general population, correct?
I think that's fair to say, as I think as we indicated in both the CPI slide and in the interest rate slide.
Okay, thanks. The next question has to do with the police budget. I know and this was raised last year, but we don't include the police budget in our budget. That's not the way it's done, I believe, in all municipalities. And so I'm wondering, when did we make that change at the region? I know it was a number of years ago. Just wondering, what's I don't fully understand the rationale of it, because I get the point that it's the police board that ultimately, approves that budget. We just approve the dollar value or not. But it's not, it is an arm's length board, but it's not unlike our library boards, in Kitchener's case, the Centre and the Square board, which are also arm's length boards, but we don't carve those out of our budgets. And so I'm wondering if, in fact, so that we're always talking about a true picture, if in fact the police budget shouldn't be part of the overall budget. I'm wondering if you can give us the history of how that got separated out and why. And when?
So through the chair, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would agree that the police budget is not part of the region's budget. It's not here today, I think, for the main reason that the police service will be going through their own process of building their budget. I don't think we have seen any numbers from them at this point. As we start to get a better understanding of where their budget is at, we will include that in our summaries to show you what the overall impact is. And of course, as part of the overall budget approval on December 13th, that will include council's approval of the police budget.
I understand that. My question is, we always talk about the two separately. There's the region budget, and then we talk about the police budget, and then we talk what that means from a blended perspective. As an example, in the area municipalities, we don't talk about the city budget and then the library budget, or in Kitchener's case, the library budget and the Centre and the Square budget, and then a blended budget. And so at some point, we separated out the police budget so that it's a separate amount from the regional one. And this goes back 6, 8 years ago. I can't remember exactly. I'm asking for the history and the rationale behind that, because it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. And I don't believe it's what happens in other municipalities.
I don't know, Bruce, I think you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I know this has come up either last year or the year before, I can't remember. If we could bring it back, that information back, do that research and bring it back, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, great, thank you. That I think will be helpful. I guess, well, I'll wait for making further comments later on, just in terms of where we ultimately, may be going or ending up for budget day. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a few more questions. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Harris. If the council will just indulge me, I just would like to pick up where Councilor Vanovich had left off and just underscore that while the WRPS is a board budget that comes to council, there's no dispute that at the end of the day, it is council who decides what the final budget is for police services. So while we aren't discussing it right now, there will be a presentation and it will always be subject to the will of regional council, because this is the body that decides how much money goes into there. And I think all of council are in receipt of some dates, October the 26th and November the 6th, where there will be 2 different times of day where we're inviting as a police board for public input, and council should feel free to make submissions to that should they choose to. Otherwise, it will come to be presented at regional council, but it is regional council that decides what the final budget of police board is.
Thank you. Councillor Salonen.
Thank you. One point I did just want to touch on that Councillor Hunick raised about the change in fares and that we're trying to incentivize away from cash. Again, in our rural populations, I know that doesn't work. I know we already had issues when we got rid of bus tickets, and that we have users who the cards are not something feasible to pay in advance to be able to access our transit services. But what I actually had a question of clarification about is on slide 24. One thing I wanted to clarify, so the homelessness budget that's currently projected in the tax levy funding, is that then just to remain as services are and not including the chronic homelessness, or where is that projection coming from?
So through the chair, the very first part of that, so the dark green piece on the left, which we've labeled as housing services, is actually, oh no, we have homelessness in there separately. I'm just looking at it now. So the numbers that we've put together so far reflect the service levels that are currently in place for both housing and homelessness. That being said, it will be a fairly significant increase year over year to reflect decisions that were made last year, to reflect increases that were approved over the course of this year, and it is one of the major drivers of the levy increase in 2024.
Okay, but currently the homelessness part is excluding the plant and chronic homelessness.
That is correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. And is it possible that later on in the budget process, we could get some service level updates on the housing component, seeing that it's almost 40% of just the estimated levy, and to acknowledge and recognize all of the services we do provide in that area?
Yes, through the chair, that will absolutely be coming forward, I would say very likely at the November the 8th meeting. And just going back, if I may, to some of the conversation, for example, about the Grand River Transit fares, all of the revenue changes will come back through one of the upcoming meetings in October and November for deliberation and decision by this committee.
Thank you very much.
I do have 2 more. I want to get back to Mr. Dyer's presentation, but I will go to Councillor Deutschmann, and then I'll wrap up with Councillor Hunick, and then over to Craig to finish up.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I just want to follow up on the comments of Mayor Verbanovic and Chair Edmund with respect to police budget. It is beyond doubt that there has been a significant change in the way that police have presented their budget to council since, let's say, 12 years ago. Previously, police would come to council with a pre-budget to review with council before they finalize their budget. And we, in fact, asked in our February 22nd motion that police come to us with a pre-budget to present before they came to us with their final budget. And I appreciate Chair Redmond's comment about the notice we got today from Mr. Mullock about 2 public meetings, but that is not what we asked for. That is part of what we asked for, but what we specifically asked for is that police to come back. And I want to note that we have not had a formal response from Police Services Board on this issue or on this motion and requests that we have made to them. And Chair Harris, I want to ask you, as Chair of Finance Committee, to send a letter to Police Services Board, to the Chair of Police Services Board, asking them to acknowledge and follow the request of council to appear before us with a pre-budget before they appear with their final budget on November 22nd. I think out of respect for regional council, out of respect for the fact that we passed a motion specifically asking for this, and the fact that we've not had a response to that request, I have concerns about the respect between Police Services Board and our council when we do not get a response back to that motion. This is a significant issue. Passing a motion of council is significant. And we specifically laid out a process, and now we're not getting anything. And Chair Harris, I would say your initial remarks at the start of this meeting talked about how important this budget process is. Mr. Dyer has echoed those comments, and yet the body that, again, a body of regional council that has the most significant part of our budget, the fact that we're not going to hear from them until they have finalized the budget 1 month before we're to finalize the overall budget, I would submit is not appropriate in the circumstances and not collaborative in any way. And to completely disregard a motion of council, I'm still processing that one, and I find that very concerning. And I would ask Chair Harris that you would send a letter asking for a response to our motion of February 22nd. That's the very least we should expect from Police Services Board on this matter. Thank you.
Point of order, point of clarification, please.
Okay, point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, because my comments are being misconstrued, and I just want to be very clear on what I was asking for. I was not questioning the process around the budget because, quite frankly, I have no concerns around the process. What I've been asking, what my questions were about was why we separate the two as two separate amounts as opposed to actually having it as part of our overall budget. And Mr. Lochner has indicated a report will come back for that, and I'm satisfied with that. Okay. But I don't want this to be misconstrued by Chair Redmond or Councillor Deutschmann or anyone else that I was questioning the process.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I guess as a follow-up to Councillor Deutschmann's request, so that we did pass a motion previously, a motion, that wasn't binding of another entity. And so I guess my question to you all, would you have, unanimous consent to further to Councillor Deutschmann's request to send a letter from myself? Do I have, unanimous consent from you all to do that? Well, I'm asking it because it's a request of one councillor. So I'm. Why would it have to be unanimous? Well, because if there's a no, then I mean, if. Why can't it just be the majority? Well.
Point of order, Mr. Chair Harris. Do you want a motion brought forward on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking for unanimous consent. If there's a no, then you would need to then go to a vote. So. If everyone's unanimous about it, then we don't have to go to that process, I think. So, or I would say. So it sounds like there's unanimous consent because I didn't hear a no. So, okay, I have a point of order, but we also have somewhat of a new point of order here from Councillor Foxton. So, Councillor Foxton.
Before we do anything, can we research the Police Act? Because the province has made it quite clear that we are not allowed to dissect the police budget. The police budget in its entirety comes to council. Council can say, take it back and make it cheaper, less money, or pass it. But we are not allowed to specifically state where, what, and they are not to report to council. The police board was set up, so I think we need to have the Police Act brought here and studied first before we run down this road of doing things we're not allowed to do.
Okay, so I know that Mr. Lochner committed to Councillor Verbanovic to report back to council with regards to the history of how the police budget and the regional budget is parsed out. So perhaps an inclusion of that report, we can include, background information on the Police Act, the role of council with regards to the approval of that budget, et cetera, et cetera. Is that fair to say, Mr. Lochner? I see some Mr. Graham here nodding as well. So, okay, moving over to
the point of order, Mr. Chair Harris. I'm only asking that a letter be sent to Police Services Board asking for a response to our motion. That's got nothing to do with what with Mayor Foxton has raised, which is of course important issues, but that's got nothing to do with asking for Police Services Board to provide a response to the motion that we all passed as council in February.
Yeah, so we've basically, I believe we've got unanimous consent from council. There was no one that said no to the request that we will draft a letter following up on the previous motion that this council passed. Is that fair for everyone? We can go to a vote if there's a no, if you want. So.
Can I just, point of order for clarification?
Okay.
You are going to send a letter asking for a response from WRPS board on the motion that was previously passed. Is that what Councillor Deutschman is asking for?
I believe that's what I hear him to be asking, yes.
Yeah, Chair Harris, that's exactly, I mean, unless we've received a response, I'm not aware. I'm just asking for a response. We laid out some specific things in that motion, and we just wanted to get a response. I mean, I think it's fair that we would get a response back Police Services Board on that, on that, a response to the motion. I mean, are we not working collaboratively here, or like, I'm just trying to understand why we haven't heard back from them on this. The rationale would be for not wanting to do what we've asked them to do.
So I would suggest this is premature and that I am not providing unanimous consent, if you want to take it to a vote.
And neither am I. I tried to put my hand.
Okay, yeah, all right,
Point of
thanks.
order?
All right, we're going to go to another point of order for Miss Hunick.
Yeah.
Councillor Hunick.
If this was already voted on in November 22nd, why are we voting on it again?
Well, it was a motion of council with a request. And that request was, the request was a motion that was adopted by this council, but obviously, we didn't receive a response. I don't know if there was a specific clarity on asking for a response, but Councillor Deutschman has requested that a letter be sent following up on that motion that was passed here by the council to get a response. So that's what that letter would ask for.
Chair Harris?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm not sure why we have to make a request on a request that's already been approved.
Well, a motion was passed. And I believe that motion, I'd have to see it, but it would have been to disseminate to Waterloo Region Police, or I don't even know if it would have.
Sorry, point of order, because I think there's a little.
Yeah, we'll have to come back to you. So we're going to deal with this one first. Yeah, so the original motion, to your point of order, was approved by council. However, Mr. Deutschman's request of us now is to send a letter from the Chair of Finance to the Waterloo Region Police Board, asking them to respond to the motion that was previously passed. That is a request that he's making of us, and therefore, not just one councillor can ask for that. They can, but it needs to be agreed by all of council. So, we're going to need to, because we didn't have unanimous consent to do that, we will now need to vote, frankly, on that. I believe there's a waiving of notice first that would need to take place prior to the request actually for the motion. So, Councillor Deutschman, before I do that, I'll go to a new point of order because I think I've addressed the first one. So, second one.
Thank you. Well, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I would actually suggest that it's not accurate to say that we haven't heard back. We may not have heard back in terms of a letter, but quite frankly, we pass all sorts of motions here that we don't get a letter back on, and on many councils. However, we did have a presentation, and this is where someone can correct me if I'm wrong, where the chief actually has, since the last budget, appeared before council, provided council with an update, talked about this issue, and talked about the process going forward. So in my view, that is a response, and a further correspondence isn't necessary.
So, Councillor Chair, just point of order, are we arguing a motion that's not on the floor? Is that what's happening right now?
Yes, that is. So you've asked for a letter to be sent. We asked for council's consideration. They're not all in agreement, so we'll need to have a motion from you, Councillor Deutschman, in order for us to proceed with, such
Sure.
letter to the police board.
Yeah, so, and just the motion would be to have Chair of Finance send a letter to Chair of Police Services Board, asking for a response to our motion of February 22nd, 2023.
Okay, Mr. Deutschman, just so we got it clear, we're going to need to move a motion to waive notice to introduce the motion first.
Right. Yeah, I understand. I was just pointing out what the motion would be.
So we can get to that next, but if you want to put forward a motion to waive notice, you'll need a seconder. Seconded.
Well, I'll need a seconder for the motion itself, and then
Well, let's get
motion.
we got to get to the first one first, I think, right? So we got to waive the notice first. So everyone, if we can pull up our e-scribe, in a minute or two, we'll put up a motion to waive notice to introduce a motion. And I will encourage you all to vote yes or no on that. And then, Councillor Deutschman, should this proceed, we will then move to the main motion. So that is defeated, as there needs to be 10 to vote in favor of notice of motion. Obviously, you know, there's time here left, so I'll let you decide whether you want to file notice for next meeting, Councillor Deutschman. But in light of
I'm
that,
fine to carry on, Chair Harris. I'm fine.
okay. In light of that, Mr. Dyer, I think we'd like to have you up to finish, and then I know there's further questions, perhaps on the entire presentation. But is this your last review of deck slides? Okay, let's finish up that, and we'll go on from there.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you to the chair. So just quickly, if we move to the next, so plan to end chronic homelessness. Yes. So we've talked about that today. The numbers are not in the budget. We'll bring that forward on November 7th and 8th. So I think we've covered that nicely. This is just an overview of non-tax revenues, which I think we don't need to spend any time on today. It's just an indication of where these numbers are sitting right now. We'll certainly go through them in a lot more detail when we get into the remaining meetings. And then just a quick overview of some of the user fee and charge proposals, some of which have already been talked about today. And again, as we go through each of the priority areas from the strategic plan, we'll bring forward the recommendations with respect to any changes to user fees and charges, or to any new user fees and charges. So a lot more discussion about this to come. And then just a quick discussion about service expansion. We've talked about that a little bit today. We wanted to just give you an indication of some of the service expansions that you'll see when we bring this forward as part of the budget on October the 18th. And as we've talked about before, there are essentially three categories to take into account. So one is where expansions were approved in 2023 and they need to be annualized into 2024 for a full year. That's the first box on the left. And in this case, that would include things like the paramedic services resources that were approved for July the 1st. Any approvals that happened over the course of 2023, including the acquisition of 139 University Ave, additional paramedic resources for January 1st, automated speed enforcement, and a few other things. And then there'll be there'll be a number of proposed service expansions for 2024 for council's consideration. Again, we'll provide an explanation and a rationale for each of these, and that we'll have motions drafted for budget to committee to consider if it wishes to add a service expansion into the 2024 budget. So overall, sitting at 6% on the base, another 1.6% for proposed service expansions, 7.6% overall, again, excluding the plan to end chronic homelessness, and on the assumption that we get to 2% assessment growth. I think I'll skip over the capital slides for now. This is just background. We'll have plenty of time to go through the capital program through the various meetings that are coming up in October and November. We should finish off through the chair just with a quick discussion about process. So the 2024 budget review schedule was approved by council back in June. You may recall we added an earlier start date, which happens to be today. We've avoided existing council meeting dates for the most part. We've added additional meetings. We've set a 6-hour limit for meetings. There are carryover meetings in your calendar that we will use only if we need them. And that should all be in your calendar right now. And we have December 13th is scheduled as the budget approval day. And I think so have I covered this? Budget to be tabled on the 18th. So as I've said, we will draft motions for budget committee to consider with respect to both service enhancements, as well as any changes to user fees and charges. And we'll ask for consideration of those motions as we work through the next few meetings. We wanted to make it clear because you won't have necessarily the benefit of having gone through in detail all of the areas, all of the budgets, say for example at the October 18th meeting. So if a service expansion, for example, is approved by council to be included in the budget, we're going to word it in such a way that if council wishes to alter that recommendation or then remove it on budget day, that you're able to do that without the need for notice or a motion to reconsider. We want to make sure that you've got maximum flexibility to make changes to the budget as we go along, but then also to make a final set of changes when we get to December 13th. I hope that gives you some comfort as we go through the next few meetings and you consider some of the service expansion and user fee changes that staff will be proposing. And here's the schedule. So again, we reconvene on October the 18th. We'll have a full tabled budget for you, operating and capital, service expansions, budget reductions. The October 18th is also the first public input meeting, and that will lead us to a series of meetings through the month of November, taking us to final budget day on the 13th. And as Connie indicated in her presentation, we're going to do our best to align the meetings with specific strategic priority areas. It might not be as clean as it shows right here, but we're generally speaking, we're targeting climate-aligned growth on October the 18th, followed by equitable services and opportunities, homes for all, and resilient and future-ready organization. I suspect there will be a little bit of crossover into various meetings, but when we're back together in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about water and wastewater, about public transit, about the transportation program, about waste management, and a few other areas. That will be the topic of your October 18th meeting date. And so now to a couple of concluding comments, and I'll be very brief here. I think there's no doubt it'll be a challenging budget. We've suggested that the 2024 budget, perhaps like other years, is going to be a lot about finding a balance. And you're going to have to balance the service levels that we have in place right now, the service expansions that we've identified to meet specific needs in the community, the consideration of funding for programs that really should be funded by the provincial or by senior levels of government, and what for you is an acceptable property tax, user fee, and user rate increase in order to meet the balanced budget requirement that every municipality must meet. And so overall, we have a similar set of economic circumstances that we found ourselves in a year ago. There is significant growth happening in the community, and we need to consider both looking after what we have in place right now and what is needed in order to service that growth. Plan to end chronic homelessness is going to come forward in November. We've gone through the base budget position. And then this bottom point, which which we've probably repeated several times, but again, aligns very well with the FCM message for today. The public's expectations of municipalities and certainly of this region relative to our ability to generate revenue to meet those services is misaligned. And I think hopefully that the motion approved by committee earlier today gets us on a path to finding a way to deal with that misalignment. And then finally on the 18th, I think I've been through this already. Stay tuned for more on climate-aligned growth on the 18th. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. Excellent work, Mr. Dyer and Connie. I do have questions, so I'd like to go to Councillor Huenick.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I'm wondering if prior to the day on which we deliberate about transit fares, we can have some additional data regarding service levels and similar sized municipalities and fare prices for those municipalities.
Through the chair, I think that is definitely possible. I think we have a pretty good idea of what the fare structure looks like in a number of other municipalities, and we'll definitely bring that forward as part of the analysis.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple comments about the police service board budget and the process, since that was well talked about previously. First of all, the police services are separate from government, and that's a point that Councillor Foxton made. So the request to bring a budget before it's approved by the board that governs that organization just does not make sense to me. The schedule outlined for our budget process here was police services budget being presented November 22nd prior to when we approve our budget. And so I just, to regional council, Councillor Deutschman seems to think there's something nefarious going on here. There is not. There's a police board. The police board looks at the services that the police provide and then provides a budget in keeping with those services. Regional council cannot do anything with the details of that budget except approve the bottom line. And I think that's been made really clear. So I guess what I would ask to my colleagues is, do you want to provide police services with a percentage increase that is acceptable, similar to what we did here? That is that, do you have a percentage in mind that you want police services to work towards? That police services board can work with. Otherwise, there's no way that regional council can go through the details of the police services board budget.
So thank you, Councillor Shantz.
Point of order, Councillor Chair Harris. I was mentioned as suspecting something nefarious, and I just want to clarify that couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, it's not, I don't suspect anything nefarious. My issue is process and process alone. I was here 12 years ago when there was a process that is not the same process as today. The process 12 years ago seemed to be more collaborative, and that's all I'm reaching out about. Nothing about nefarious or anything like that. And I really hope my seatmate and fellow councillor isn't suggesting that I think something is nefarious that's going on. That's a pretty harsh criticism of my comments, and I would ask that Councillor Shantz just look at Mayor Shantz, look at what I've been asking is just about process. I have complete respect for Waterloo Regional Police Services and all the work that they do. It's just about working collaboratively because we have a difficult budget year, and that's what this is about. So nothing, I'm a bit offended by the comment, and it does hurt that would be ascribed to me in a public meeting to suggest that I think there's something nefarious going on with Police Services Board. I'm not sure I'm gonna have to process.
Okay, so I did allow for a point of order, but I'm going. No, Councillor Shantz.
I will apologize for using nefarious. Okay. That was a strong word. It came into my head. So I will apologize to councillors.
So I want to get the focus back on. I want to get the focus back onto the presentations that we heard today regarding the budget, and I know there was topics that came up around police board services, etc. I do believe we know that Mr. Lochner is going to bring back a report to council on several of those items. So I would like to carry on with questions of Mr. Dyer pertaining to the deck that we've reviewed today. So I will go to. Chair Redmond, if you were next.
Just a point of order and clarification. Everybody around this table is a councillor, and we seem to have been slipping for a couple of months and a couple of meetings about that, so everybody should be addressed as councillor.
Thank you. Good reminder.
Point of order, Chair Harris. I totally agree, but I understood there was some comments about, I didn't want to offend anybody. So I'm just concerned about offending anybody with respect to title, but I'm glad Chair Redmond has clarified that. And I'm more than happy to just refer to everybody as councillor. Thank you.
Good idea around this horseshoe. Councillor James.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Harris. I'm not going to mention the police budget at this point, but because there is public engagement components to this, Craig or Connie, can you just speak to when the public engagement sessions are, how many they are, just so that those who may be listening, watching, media can ensure that gets out to community? Yeah, no, good question. I do have all of those dates that I'm going to conclude with, so if you want to hang tight, I'm going to get into that for the public record. So I will move on to Councillor Sellen.
Thank you. My questions were also on public engagement, which that's great. You're going to share those dates. Is it possible we can circulate those dates to all the area municipalities should they want to advertise as well in those areas to come in and comment?
Absolutely.
Oh, did they?
Absolutely. That being said, Councillor Foxon.
Thank you very much, Craig. You did a great job. I want to thank you for what you did today. I want people to also understand that 7.6 or the 6% or whatever is base. That's adding absolutely nothing new. Just status quo was the 6%.
That is correct.
And so I want people to be aware of that. And that does that include inflation?
It does.
It does include inflation. So that's all it includes. So we have our work to cut out to us, but I want to thank you again. And what was that movie you wanted me to watch?
The Big Short.
The Big Short, which is why it crashed in the States in 2007.
That is also correct.
So anybody wants to watch The Big Short to get our eyes open, thank you.
Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Chair Harris, Craig, if we want to add something to the budget, starting October 18th, we can bring it forward. And do we need a notice of motion, or do we need, or just bring it forward?
That's a good question. So I think motions can be like we're expecting that motions can be entertained at any time during the process. October 18th is the first detailed review, so that would certainly be acceptable. I may need some help with respect to the notice requirements. I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Yeah, so we are going to be providing clarity to council with regards to the timing of those requests. So I'm conferring with the clerk here, and he is relaying that we will have clarity around the timelines for council to feed into that process by October the 18th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Foxon.
Thank you. In the past, they haven't been motions because motion means that council passes them, which means that, so instead it's just, we used to give you our requests verbally. They were compiled with the list and you were brought back the impact of them later. Because everybody would have to agree with them unanimously if there was a motion or whatever, and we didn't do that before. We just brought our request forward. And some of you laughed at us and some of you didn't, but that's what.
So I've got an answer on both those. So, I mean, Mr. Dyer, does that conclude your remarks for today?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. So that being said, I know we are all obviously hearing from residents and community members about those increasing needs, hearing from residents. Oh, I didn't see the hand. I'm sorry, Miss Councillor Liggett.
Thank you. I did have it up a while ago, so thanks for noticing. I have a question with regard to percentages of tax increases. So $1 million is equal to what percent?
Through the chair on the overall regional budget in total, including police, $7 million is about 1%. So 1/7 of 1%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Verbenovic.
Yeah, I think just, I think Councillor Foxton was starting to go there. Just from a process point of view, has it not been our normal practice that on budget day, folks can bring ideas forward? And I mean, the one thing that is different here than at our area municipality has been that people would put their ideas on the table. At the end, council as a whole would simply approve them as direction to staff. So it's all of council giving that direction. But generally, it's been understood, both here and at area municipalities, that councillors can request things on budget day. There hasn't been a requirement for notice of motion, because that's the whole point of budget day. And then we all obviously would then deal with it, and ultimately on final budget day when all the different reports come back. So if there's going to be a change to that, I hope that we're going to have some conversation and dialogue around that from a process point of view. But it would personally I'll just say it would concern me if we change things in that regard. I will say just overall, this is going to be a challenging budget year. It's challenging for us in terms of regional council and the pressures that we're hearing from community. I think we're going to have to prioritize some things in terms of core services, in my mind, people-focused services, and some other things that are, for lack of a better word, perhaps nice to haves that might have to wait until economic times are a little better. And so, I'm certainly, together with police budget, going to be looking for something that's, not far off from the rate of inflation. Recognizing some of those pressures and the need to invest in human elements. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that will come back as part of budget is our staffing, is a report that shows us staffing in each department and division, and also the number of vacancies in each of those areas as of a certain date. So let's say, as of September 30th, because I think those are some of the tougher conversations that we're, nobody likes them, but that I think that we're going to have, and certainly a logical place to start is where there's vacancies around that, so that we have the room that we need in order to tackle the things that are real priorities for people in our community, not unlike some of the things that we had to reprioritize during the pandemic. In order to make sure that we had the dollars that we needed to do that work.
Great, and I'll conclude with Councillor McCabe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just a quick note to sort of remind my colleagues is that we did just complete our strategic plan, which was, as Connie MacDonald has indicated on today and on a number of occasions, that is fully informed by our community. And so I'm hoping that we that we look to that as really the key direction, right? Like that has laid out what our community has told us are their priorities and our shared priorities. So really, that's the document that I think we should be looking at, and looking at our budget as, you know, as our budget needs to align with that strategic plan. We've approved the strategic plan. Our communities had deep consultation with it. Now I think we really need to look at our budget strategically and say, does our budget align with the key pillars of our strategic plan? And that's what I hope that we bring throughout this entire budget discussion. Thank you.
And we will allow for those opportunities from the public, or to hear from the public, frankly. And so we are going to have regional public input meetings on October the 18th at 6 p.m., November 1st at 6 p.m., and again on November 29th at 6 p.m. There will also be public input sessions organized by Waterloo Region Police Service for input into the police budget. And those will be held on October the 26th at 1 p.m. to 2, and November 6th from 7 to 8. So we'll make sure that folks have that information on all the social networks to really encourage the public to come out and share their feedback. Of course, we'll be looking for feedback from you directly or as our colleagues. Similar to last year, I would ask that any information requests of staff related to service expansions, reductions, or changes to user fees are received by the end of the Plan and Budget Committee meeting on November the 8th. This will, of course, allow time for staff to provide the required analysis for our use in subsequent meetings. So with that being said, I will now ask for a mover and a seconder to adjourn today's Strategic Planning and Budget Committee. Councillor Salonen, seconded by Councillor Huenick. So I'll ask you to check out your e-scribe for yes and no. I believe Councillor Liggett is off of e-scribe, so. Yeah, and that is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Great job, Chair Harris.
Oh,